Welcome back to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis James. With me, as always, is Dave Horowitz. Hello, Dave.
Hello there.
And this week, we are continuing SHOCKtober. SHOCKtober with pretty much one of the archetypical slasher films of all time, Friday the 13th, the original. It spawned a franchise, but pretty much at its core, the message of this movie is that being a single mom is hard.
Okay.
And occasionally your son will drown while teenagers are having sex. I felt silly trying to recapture what this film is about because everybody should know this film by now. But if you want a bigger encapsulation, the movie opens on the reopening of Camp Crystal Lake, a camp that was shut down years ago because teenage counselors kept dying. And it's reopened. Some new counselors come to get the camp ready before its opening, and they start dying off one by one because a mysterious killer is stalking them. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think that's it. Great synopsis.
Thank you.
Well, the fact of the matter is that I don't love slasher films or horror films. Not a fan of the jump scare.
This should be perfect. Dueling perspectives.
I have great respect for the genre. I mean, listen, spacing. Jason makes it to space. You can't say this thing doesn't have legs. You can't say it doesn't capture the imagination of the world. It's just not my bag,
Right.
which isn't a big deal. But you just said, like, I feel silly summing up what this is. People must know by now. I thought you were going to say, I feel silly summing up what this movie is about because it's about so little.
Well, that's a very valid feeling because everyone involved with the film will tell you that this movie was only made because Halloween made a killing at the box office.
Sure, I figured.
And they wanted to rip it off and make a lot of money. And Sean S. Cunningham, the producer-director of this film, succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. In the special features that come with the DVD, he is holding court in his mansion as he talks about how the film was born of that mercenary kind of agenda. And he is now in the Friday the 13th business. His son is a producer. They have Friday the 13th projects going on, several ones at any given time. And it's kind of crazy to think, now that we know everything Jason has become, that they weren't even thinking sequel, let alone franchise, let alone Jason as a killer in the first film.
Yeah,
Crazy.
I mean, I'm watching this movie because I'm watching it with almost zero recollection, even though I'm sure I saw it in the theater. But I'm watching it and I'm thinking, wow, everything I know about Friday the 13th has almost nothing to do with this first movie.
Yeah, it's like an indie film.
Sitting down to watch Friday the 13th, you may want to be warned that, like, there's no hockey mask in this movie.
Yeah, spoiler.
Yeah, spoiler.
You've had 50 years.
I checked. I was like, when does the hockey mask? Third. It comes in the third movie.
In the second one, he's wearing like a potato sack with a hole for the eye, like in The Town That Dreaded Sundown. It's just a totally different killer.
I vaguely remember that getup. It also made me think, what births a Jason or a Michael Myers or a Freddy? And I guess it's different in different cases, but I think a lot of times what gives life to these things is box office returns.
Yeah.
Because we need another one of these is how you get Jason.
Yes. It's not sexy, but it's true. It's all about the money.
Yeah.
So when you start out watching this film and you keep in mind that it is trying to do what Halloween does, you can see all the parallels. The writer took a great deal from the Halloween story. You don't start in present day. You start in the past where there was an incident that gave birth to evil or violence. And then you jump to present day. So suddenly you have sort of a legend and you have a backstory that is informing everything that comes after it. You have the point of view camera work that is showing you what the killer sees in Halloween that is also in Friday the 13th. And you have an identifiable sound motif for the killer. there was that gorgeous music in Halloween, that creepy yet beautiful music in Halloween that John Carpenter did. But also you had that sound motif that John Williams did in Jaws. And you only hear it when the killer shark is coming. And in this film, you only hear the Jason, all of that wonderful vocalization. And the music that was done by Harry Manfredini is a perfect mix of the killer shark theme from Jaws and Bernard Herrmann's music from Psycho. It's almost like he mixed the two, because you get that kind of sharp thrush of music that almost sounds like the audio equivalent of a knife slashing someone. And you get that foreboding kind of like bass and vocalization that lets you know that the killer is near. Also, you have fairly bloodless killings. You have blood in the aftermath when you see bodies, but by and large, there's only, in Friday the 13th, there's only a couple of times where you see the killing, and it's done well by Tom Savini and Tim Miner, but there's more blood in this than was in Halloween. I think in another attempt to ratchet up the horror. I think you really have to take your hat off to Friday the 13th, because if you're trying to outdo Halloween or trying to follow in its footsteps, it hit a lot of the right marks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have to say, the three main things you mentioned, working backwards, the theme, the first thing you mentioned was having a legend and then jumping ahead. And I forget what you said in the middle.
Point of view.
Oh yeah, the voyeurism. Yeah, the POV of the killer. I saw all three of those, and I acknowledged all three of those coming from Halloween. So I noticed all three of those nods.
Right.
Let's do all the things that work, and let's do them all more. And I think that the bloodlessness of Halloween may largely be logistic.
Right.
You don't have sci-fi guys yet who have small pumps for making squirting arteries.
Yeah.
I remember it was never my thing as a kid to be into horror movies, but I remember other kids being into the idea of these syringe plungers that you could make blood squirt out of the wound and stuff. And
where are those kids today, Dave? I'm worried.
Behind bars, deep in a hole. I mean, you could probably work forward from Psycho and be like a tiny bit of blood going down a drain.
In black and white, even.
Yeah, in black and white. And then moving, inching slowly towards blood spraying everywhere. Carrie, someone saying like, hey, is there any way we can dump a few gallons of blood on her? It's like, yeah, we could work that out. We could work that out.
Which is funny that it took the horror franchises here in America to get to the point where they could do believable blood effects, because I think Japanese films have been doing outrageously great blood and artery shooting effects since the 50s.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, they had the samurai sword to contend with, so their wounds were, and we mostly did guns, so their wounds were very different.
Right. Friday the 13th didn't just ape Halloween. It also brought a lot to the table. Like, we meet the Harbinger, who is Ralph, and he's like, you're going to Camp Blood. They're all going to die. You're all going to die. And it's like, shut up, Ralph. Yeah. So, I mean, it's become a trope, so much so that it was brilliantly skewered in one of my favorite Halloween watches every year, which is Cabin in the Woods by Joss Whedon.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And so the Harbinger is the guy who, he tells you, he's almost like a human signpost of like, anyone who goes past this point, you're on your own. So Annie, who's going to be the cook up at the lake, she's hitching. This truck driver gives her a ride. And he says to Ralph, he says like, leave these people alone, Ralph. It's like, shut up. No one wants to hear you. And then he gets her in the truck and he's driving her to Crystal Lake, and he turns to her and he's like, quit now. Don't go. You just shut down Ralph. But I love that girl, Annie. She's adorable. She's played by an actress, Robbie Morgan, who is married and has been married for almost 50 years, I think, to Mark Wahlberg, too. He's the guy who hosted Antiques Roadshow, and now he hosts Temptation Island.
Annie is great. I was so bummed
She's
that
adorable.
she died so soon. She's the best.
She's the best, especially I think the lead in this movie has zero charisma.
Ugh,
I
yeah.
don't mean to be mean or anything, but give Annie a big role.
No, Annie should have been there longer. Like I said, I had very little recollection of the film. First of all, right away I was like, "Oh wow, this looks nicer than I remember. There's some beautiful
Oh,
cinematography.
gorgeous.
The town, the corner where she stops in that little store.
I love that
This,
town.
oh, it's beautiful. It reminds me of several places in upstate New York, and
I believe it's
uh,
all filmed in New Jersey,
yeah,
which is very upstate New York.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm watching her, and I'm thinking, "Oh, she's gonna be great." Like, I'm looking forward to watching, and then right away, I'm like, "Oh, she's not gonna be around."
She is killed so early in the movie that it could almost be a different killer. She
Yeah,
caught up with
yeah,
the
yeah.
Zodiac on her
Right.
way to
Yeah,
Camp
yeah.
Crystal Lake.
I mean, this killer drives an automobile.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, this
She ran
killer
into
picks up
Ted Bundy.
hitchhikers. Like,
Yeah.
this is not a climbing out of a lake killer. This is not a, this is a driving, picking up hitchhikers killer. Very different.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of continuity in the murder, because looking back on these movies in my head, I always picture them like, Freddy's thing is, don't fall asleep. If you do, I'll slash you with my fingers that have blades on them. Happy birthday to me is,
Right.
and so on and so forth. And then I'm watching and I'm like, they show some of the murders and they don't show some of the murders, and some
Yeah.
of the murders are creative and the person is suspended, and then some of the murders are the person is laying haphazard on the floor.
Or
Uh,
there's one where the guy who runs the camp, he's just like, "Oh, hi, how you?"
oh,
Like it, and I
yeah.
think that's got to all be budget, right?
Or we
We
were
can,
shooting at night, and I got to tell you, this is about all I could do. This is about all I could put
yeah,
together with what you gave me.
yeah,
You guys, it was way too dark, and you guys should have done something about that.
right. This movie, a lot like other movies of its time period, it was like the scariest movie you could see for a while. And now it looks so primitive that it almost reads like a comedy. It's very campy. And, I think it's sometimes easy to lose sight of the fact that for the time, these were cutting edge special effects. Like I look at it now and I'm like, well, the throat cutting of Annie that we're talking about against the tree, I'm like, oh my God, the clay that's supposed to be her neck is a totally different color than her face. And
Mhm.
likewise with Kevin Bacon getting an arrow through the back of, his neck. It's
Though
like
the
his head is clear. The neck is like a giraffe neck. It's like 12 inches long and a different color again. So looking, but at the time, this was the best anyone could do. And it made Tom Savini.
Yeah. Also, no one was watching it at home on a 55-inch television. I mean,
Hmm.
a lot of special effects are suffering now because we have such clear pictures on our televisions.
Yeah.
And we're noticing things like that. So much easier to be scary in a movie theater. You're in a dark room with strangers.
Mass hysteria kicks in
Yeah,
too.
yeah. There's a group mentality. It's much easier to be scary in a theater than it is at home. I kept being impressed with the murders and with the slashes and with,
Hmm.
yeah, there's an element of pretty good for the time. I kind of also saw like pretty good in general. It's almost like, I'm not that impressed with, the team that has so much money that they can buy the championship. I'm not super impressed with the horror movie that was scary because they were able to spend millions of dollars on being scary. So I was pretty impressed by it.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. Let's talk a little bit about deaths. Do you have a favorite death in this?
I watched it actually 2 nights ago. And then today, just to refresh my head, I watched the trailer. And the trailer shows every death. The trailer is a voice going,
Uh,
1,
oh, wow.
2,
Really?
3, and it counts all the way up to 12, and it shows all 12 murders, which I'm like, spoilers? And then
Could
it
that
says
have been,
Friday.
is that vintage? Is
Yeah, I
that
checked.
someone?
It
Wow.
said actual,
That's crazy. Well, yeah,
theatrical
body count.
trailer.
They're trying to underline that the body count is higher than it was in Halloween.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, so of all the murders, I'm with Kevin Bacon hand on the forehead, arrow from the bottom of the bunk
Right.
coming out of the neck. You know that
Yeah.
little spot between your collarbones and
Mm.
your esophagus where there's like a little pool?
Is that the clavicle?
Something like that.
Mm.
That spot fills up with blood when the arrow
Yeah.
comes through, which was great. And
Fiendishly
it's not
accurate.
yeah, it was fiendishly accurate, and it was classic in its postcoital murder.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm misremembering, and I think I'm bringing in murders from later parts
Probably.
of the franchise, but I thought they were gonna get a spear coming through both of them in
Oh
the
my god.
bunk. It's
Or
one of them, but
somebody
I've
I mean,
seen it. I never expected them to. I'm happy for them that they got to climax,
yeah, yeah.
and he was smoking a joint, and she got to go clean up, so they had everything. One of the things that drives me crazy in Home Alone, Kevin McAllister.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Hey, trust me, Kevin
Okay.
McAllister, he's setting up his whole house as a house of horrors or something, but he fixes himself this delicious mac and cheese meal, and he sits at the table and he's about to eat, and then the fucking clock rings. And he's like, "Oh, I've got to get ready." And he goes, and I'm like, "You didn't factor the mac and cheese into your fucking night. He didn't get to eat his mac and cheese." So I'm
They
happy
got
for
their
them.
mac and cheese.
Yeah.
See, we're gonna come up with all these terms that are gonna help us to be a clean show.
I think it's got to be the character named Lizzie with an axe to the head. They don't show you the actual murder, but they show you the aftermath. There's an axe sticking out of her
Yeah.
face. And I didn't realize until I just said her name, but Lizzie, as in Lizzie
Oh,
Borden,
Lizzie Borden took an
and an
axe.
axe in her
Yeah.
face. I mean,
Nice.
come on, that's a wink.
My first thought was, "Wow, that looked very real." And I didn't rewind it because I was like, "Good for you." I didn't rewind it because I'm not supposed to be able to.
Right.
So I forced myself to let it keep playing. But
Hmm.
I very much thought, "Wow, that was a very believable axe to the face."
Well, it's one of those things where he can take his time with it, and he built it, and it's just got to be in frame for 3 seconds.
Yeah,
When he did the
yeah.
actual murders, it's hard to cover up how primitive the times were. But an axe to the face, he prepped it
Yeah,
for 8 hours.
we haven't used the term yet, but practical effects. I think everybody is so sick of CGI and it does amazing things, especially for
Yeah,
me because I'm a sci-fi guy and I need ships to fly around and I
right.
need laser beams to go shooting through the air. But practical effects in horror, I think everyone has come around to really appreciating them.
Yeah. So in rewatching it, what was really striking to me was that all of the things I found interesting about it had very little to do with horror. There is a scene in a diner where the guy who owns the camp and is running the camp, apparently he left all these kids and then he just went for a meal by himself. But he's talking to this counter lady named Sandy, who looks kind of like Dame Edna. And it's this weird exchange with her, and he leaves her a 75-cent tip because those were the
On
days when that was a good
$3.
on three
Yeah,
dollars, and she's
yeah.
over the moon. But I just found myself transfixed by that scene for minutes after it ended. Like, why do you stick that in? That's what did we learn?
Advance the story? No.
It's so
Set anything
bizarre.
up? No.
It's really weird. And also, there was another scene that I found humorous. I had a big crush this time around on the character named Brenda, played by Laurie Bartram. She's beautiful, but the thing I couldn't get past, all people have complexity to them, but what I found odd was that she introduces the game of strip Monopoly to two of the other characters. She was wearing a bikini earlier in the movie. She's apparently very comfortable with herself sexually. She's drop dead gorgeous. And then she goes to get ready for bed and she puts on this down to the ankles nightgown that is kind of like what Tippi Hedren bought for herself at Brinkmeyer's and the Birds. And it's just like this 1800s nightgown. And then I was similarly remembering that, like, the girls on Eight is Enough used to wear it. My sisters back in the 70s used to
Yes.
wear that. It
Uh-huh.
was a thing. But I'm
Yeah.
like, even if it is a thing, we're doing a sexy horror movie
Yeah.
where and she's out in the rain. You would think they'd have her in like a t-shirt and panties like Lizzie's character. So that was just odd to me. And that's
That was a crazy item. It's like an Eastern European night frock. It's it's and it's under her thick terry robe,
yeah,
which
yeah.
she unties her thick terry robe, and you're like, here we go.
Oh my
And which
God.
also brings up a point, which is this movie is very different to watch when you've watched an actual girl take her shirt off. Like, this movie is geared towards hundreds of thousands of horny little boys.
Yeah.
And it's a very different watch when you're not that anymore. It's like if someone invented a way for kids to go see some nudity and some sex. It was like,
Mhm.
hey, we can't make movies with nudity and sex for kids. That's not right. And somebody said, what if 80% of the people in the movie were killed with knives and axes? Would that make it better? It's like, actually, it would. It's like, can I go see a sex movie? Absolutely not. Can I go see a murder movie with sex in it? Sure.
Yeah, there's something sick about that
There
with
is, and that's what
human beings.
I was freaking myself out a little, but it's okay because it's cloaked in mass murder.
So I don't care if this is a spoiler. You've had plenty of time to see this film. Let's talk about Mrs. Voorhees as the killer. Let me just ask you, do you find her, as killers in franchises go, somewhat benign or truly frightening?
I don't know. It's so hard to look at her as a 2023 person and understand what it was like to see then. But it's borderline ridiculous. Yeah.
That's exactly the right term.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
borderline ridiculous because it's not just this woman. She's not bedraggled. She is dentist office secretary
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
Just utterly, yeah, benign.
Yeah. I think the reason she's not bedraggled and like made up more scary, it's kind of a twist on Psycho. Instead of
mm,
Norman being the killer and dressing like his mom, they have Betsy Palmer as Mrs. Voorhees doing both voices, the voice of Jason, killer mommy, killer, and the voice of herself as his mommy. So that's also why they have her dressing so mannishly. It's really just for a Norman Bates like reveal in a wig and a dress at the end of Psycho. They've been shooting like a man's feet and a man's hands and a man's shirt sleeve so that you can then show her in jeans and boots. And it's really a woman. Oh my God. And then you kind of, I guess, are supposed to feel for her or at least identify with the fact that she lost this child because some kids were having sex when they should have been looking after him. And so she kills other. But like, how many kids does a camp lose in a summer anyway? 3, 4?
I
Like
know, yeah.
accidents happen. And one of the holes in the script that I find troublesome
We've
is
arrived.
we've arrived at the hole in the script. You know, I understand even attacking corn-fed Mormon-looking kids at the beginning of the flashback
Oh yeah.
because they were about to fornicate, and you can't have that because that's what they were doing when my Jason was killed. But she goes after people who are even virgins in this thing. She goes after Ned, the kind of class clown who dressed as a Native
Mm,
American with the headdress. The police guy said, "Can it, Cochise," which
yeah.
is we used for this episode title. That guy is clearly still a virgin. He gets killed. The girl I brought up before with the ancient nightdress, all she wants to do is lie in bed and read her book. But that particular girl answered the call. Mrs. Voorhees was like, "Help me, help me." And the girl came out ostensibly to help whatever child needed help, like her Jason. What,
You're
you kill
right.
that character?
That's
What's
fucking
that about?
gaslighting. That is fucking
Yeah.
gaslighting.
Entrapment is what it
I thought
is.
your main problem was not saving my son. No, I'm talking about this camp cannot open again. It's a Scooby-Doo scenario.
Ah, nice.
She is old Mr. Smithers,
Right.
and she will not, this camp cannot open, not because it's
Hmm.
on a gold mine or an oil well, but because
Right.
she is just dead set on it not reopening because it is the place where her son was killed. She doesn't want other people to die.
Yeah. How ironic is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are easier ways of shutting that camp down. Like, I don't know.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. She faked her little boy voice, help me. The girl came out in the rain.
In the rain. She was all snug in bed.
She was all snug in bed with a book ready to go. And she came out, risked life and limb on a spooky night to find the kid. And her reward was to be killed. That's terrible.
That's some fucked up shit,
That
Mrs.
is.
Voorhees.
Wow. Good plot hole.
Yeah, could drive a truck through that one. I do like that this all takes place on Jason's birthday. That's a nice little, it's again from Halloween, Michael Myers returns on Halloween all those years later.
Mhm.
They happen to be opening it up close to his birthday, and then on his birthday, it's Kill Fest.
And you can also cue that up like so much to box office stuff. It pays to have a date because once you get rolling, we got to release another one of these every few years.
Here's the craziest thing, because you're talking about this film and its release. This film was released on May 9th, 1980. You were like, oh, it's great to have like a special date where you can.
Yeah.
But I would have just assumed it like, oh, we got to release it Halloween season 1980. Not so.
Right. Also, these things don't, Friday the 13th, Halloween, Freddy Krueger, these things aren't what they are until they have established themselves.
Yeah.
And then once they're established, what they were just dissolves. For instance, me being like, wait a minute, this movie's about a middle-aged woman who kills people. There's no hockey mask. It really is like box office receipts decide how iconic this character becomes.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to mention a couple of things, again, that struck me that had very little to do with actual killing in the film. When the pickup truck enters and it's holding the three characters, the like class clown character, Kevin Bacon and his girlfriend, on the dashboard is a copy of the book The Godfather by Mario Puzo. There was a bidding war for this film, because they shot the film before they knew who was going to release it. I think it's pretty funny that the studio that released The Godfather released this film. That was kind of cute to me. It's probably just Kevin Bacon was reading the book.
Yeah, almost certainly.
We were talking about all of the kind of special effects and the different deaths in the film. The most believable death and the most tragic death in this entire film is when the snake is killed with a machete.
So glad you brought it up.
I'm telling you something. I think this is like pre-PETA and ASPCA being all up in movie makers' business.
It absolutely is.
Because that is disturbing. And the effects on the human stuff wasn't that good. So I feel like they killed a fucking snake.
They did. It was the most upsetting. I know certain people will be annoyed when I say that was the most upset I got during this movie.
Yeah.
Was when that was genuinely upset. And God forbid they didn't get it in the first take. Did someone have a bag of snakes?
Oh, no. How many snakes had to die? You're so right.
Yeah. And first they harassed the snake for a while, which I could have lived with. Then they chopped it. And it was obviously chopping a real snake.
And they played it for laughs. It was like, well, I guess we know what we're having for dinner. Like,
that made it worse too. Yep. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. Now, I have to throw on the disclaimer. It was a different time. And I probably laughed at the snake scene the first 2 times I saw it as a teenager.
Yeah, you're right. It's a different mindset, different time. I'm willing to, to give them not a pass. I think it was gross and upsetting.
There's a character named Bill who plays strip Monopoly with the 2 girls. He plays guitar a little bit, and apparently he was a lot of fun on the set. And his real name is Harry Crosby, and his father was Bing Crosby.
Wow.
Apparently Tom Savini loved hanging out with him all day and just asking him about Bing Crosby. But it's kind of funny because nowadays, Nepo babies are everywhere. I'm shocked that someone like Harry Crosby, who I think was very likable in the film, especially for a male character, they're usually like portrayed
one-dimensional.
As, very one-dimensional in these kind of films. He seemed very likable and kind of a cool guy. I'm shocked he couldn't parlay this into an acting career for himself.
Yeah, sometimes when I ask myself that, I think perhaps he didn't want an acting career.
Yeah, he could
He
do
may have done
anything.
he has options. He comes
He
from
has
a family
options.
with options. He was like, "I'm gonna try film," and maybe he did it and was like, "I'm not a fan."
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah,
Prior to the big showdown with Mrs. Voorhees, Alice is just throwing objects at Mrs. Voorhees,
I
and
know.
she's like swatting them away, like toilet paper roll and
Yeah,
a
not
I could have
heavy
watched
objects.
a 3 hour supercut of just Alice throwing household items at Mrs. Voorhees. It just I was tickled by that, and I don't know why. But it was just, I think it was the way that Betsy Palmer was reacting, because it was clearly, there was a guy with I don't even think steady cams were a thing, but there was a guy with a camera in front of her, just kind of, and she had to fake, reacting, and he was just
Mhm.
throwing things. That is just, it was adorable.
It almost feels like one of those shots that gets forced into a 3D
I
movie.
know, and they did
Yeah.
3D, which I like that one. But also in the fight, they do some stuff that drives you and I crazy. We talked about it in the Warriors. She hits her with a fire poker. She like hits her on the back.
Mhm.
She drops the fire poker and runs
Immediately
out.
drops it and bleeds, yeah.
Immediately. She hits her with the frying pan and she knocks her down. She then drops the frying pan and runs out. I would have gone to town with that frying pan until there was no frying pan anymore. Just cave that head in, Cliff Booth style. And then later there's a machete. She picks up the machete and chops her head off. After that, you don't need to double tap, but double tapping, I can't believe that there's no double tapping. What was the first horror movie to double tap?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. There's probably, like, super fan guys who could tell you right away.
Yeah, please let us know this in the
Yeah.
comments. But because I would love to know that, because in Zombieland, that's one of his rules is double tap.
Yeah, it's literally written on the screen.
Yep.
It's in the text exposition. And it's funny because it's an imaginary world where the characters have never seen a horror movie. They've never seen a slasher movie. It's
Mm.
hard to imagine a human being that's never seen a slasher movie. Most human beings in real life who have never seen a slasher movie know that when you cave in someone's skull, they don't come back for you.
I was about to say that that's just one of those things where we forget that they were writing the rules of slasher films, because there weren't slasher films as a genre per se. But then I thought to myself, there have been Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons for decades
Yeah.
earlier. And believe me, Wile E. Coyote understands you got to fucking double tap and hide the body. Like if he could ever get a hold of that fucking Roadrunner. So I don't know why I made him a killer. We can't finish up talking about special effects without talking about what was probably the greatest special effect in the entire film, which is Mrs. Voorhees, our killer, getting her head chopped off with a machete.
Mhm.
I thought, especially since they used slow-mo on it and it was a night shoot, I thought that effect held up pretty good.
I did too. I
It had the
I was
arterial jets.
It had squirts, and the camera was on it. I mean,
Right.
slow-mo.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny, given the film up till then, where they cut away so quickly so that you don't see just how fake things are, that they're like, we're going to give you our biggest effect.
Well, you kinda have to. I mean, you are
Yeah,
killing your killer, and when you're
yeah,
killing your killer and you don't know about Friday the 13th, 1 through 13,
right.
you better deliver. Though Friday the 13th delivers one last time in a beautiful way without a murder, which is the Jason jump scare boat attack.
Absolutely.
That's where this movie steps out of copycat. Very well done. Trailing her fingers in the water. Is something
Mm.
going to grab her? But then the hands come back in the boat and she's fine. And you absolutely let your guard down. There's cops there. Nothing creepy is going to happen with cops there because there's never a witness of the really good stuff. And then partially rotten, seaweed growing Jason
Three
comes.
eighths sea monkey.
Yeah, because he comes way out of the water to grab her
Yeah.
and pull her down, and it is scary. It's a great last scare.
When I used to
Yeah,
watch that scene as a kid, and once you know it's coming, I used to brace myself for it.
I bet.
And then it
Yeah.
always scared me. And I tried not to look too closely at him for
Mm,
fear that
because
I
you
would have
didn't want.
nightmares.
Hmm.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, yeah, that is a great thing. And I love the fake ending, the faux ending, where they pull the rug out from you. Apparently, when that happened in movie theaters, people were like filing for the exits, and then they would hear everyone in the
Oh,
theater gasp, and then they would either run back in or just turn around in the aisle because that is such a great fake out.
terrific. Yeah. The scene before it is a stunningly beautiful, idyllic lake scene. The foliage and the water are incredible. I mean, this is Attenborough nature documentary shooting. It's so serene.
It looks almost like an oil painting. It's
It
like
really
so
does. Yeah.
beautiful, the composition, and it's placid and serene. It's shattered so beautifully
Oh,
by that
it's, yeah.
eruption in the water.
Mhm.
And it's amazing when you know what the franchise became. It's amazing to stop and think that Sean S. Cunningham himself has said that was all in her head.
Right.
That's how he envisioned it when he did it. She had a nightmare, and then she woke up in the hospital and everything. That's very much a Dorothy at the end of Wizard of Oz scene. She's surrounded by the Tin Man and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Cowardly Lion and the Scarecrow. And someone tells her, yeah, the police didn't think you were going to make it. Like, so she was clearly passed out when they found her. So she wasn't seeing the cops, but maybe she was
Mhm.
dreaming about that as well. So when you know all of that, that it was just something thrown in to get a jump scare out of people, like the end of Carrie or the end of Jaws with the explosion, it's shocking that they didn't have an eye towards using Jason in something else. And he had to be talked into it. He's like, what? What do you mean Jason was living underwater all these years? That doesn't make sense. Like, so
Which
it's
is beautiful because Jason was living underwater all these years. Then Cunningham's self from the future appears in the room and goes, "Dude, you don't know the half of it. He's
yeah.
chained at the bottom of
I
this
love
lake."
that one where he's chained at the bottom of the lake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, you'll be surprised how much this character of yours, how much time he spends in
Yeah.
suspended animation.
And it makes sense. The idea is not to open a Taco Bell, it's to open the first one and then
Mm.
franchise it. That's where the
Yeah.
money is. So it makes total
Yeah.
sense. There's one thing that's kind of funny about this film. And again, it takes after Halloween, but it also takes after Barney Miller. There's a cold opening. We open
Yeah.
up, it's 1958, and we're in Camp Crystal Lake. We don't know yet who's doing it, but that person kills them. We focus on the girl who's screaming. It goes slow motion, and then she freezes, and her mouth is wide in a scream.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's a
And
still.
then,
Yeah.
yeah, and then
And they zoom in to the point where it gets grainy.
the Friday the 13th, written in white, comes screaming towards the screen, breaking the glass,
Yeah.
almost like High Anxiety, Mel Brooks.
I know it was a
Uh,
little funny.
and and then you get the credits, and then you get the film starting in earnest in the present day.
Yeah.
So cold opening really, really works, especially if you're starting with a flashback. And that's
Mhm.
a beautifully shot sequence as well.
And it surprised me, because I was doing that thing where you hit play, and then when you're at home, you think you got a minute. It launched right in, and I had to like,
You sit
"Oh,
down with your Skittles and your big tub
I'm
of
like,
popcorn, and you're missing
yeah."
half the movie.
I did not make the comparison to Barney Miller,
Mm.
but, now that you mention it.
I talked about the dichotomy of that one girl I have a crush on dressing like an old lady at night. But the corn fed Mormon kids, the girl who's like playing guitar at first before she walks off with the boy, which is also kind of an homage to Jaws and how it begins. There's guitar
Oh,
music
yeah.
and a couple that
Mhm.
walks off before a killing. But it's really funny because she's singing, milk and honey on the other side. And then it
Mhm.
finishes and she like looks at the guy, this real apple pie looking, and she just mouths the word, come on, at him. And they go, and I'm like, whoa, what another kind of dichotomy. And then she's like making out with him and like, do I kiss better than? And she gives some other girl's name. And I'm like, what? And then they're up there and she's like, did you mean all those things you said? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what kind of back history are, like, the dialogue is just crazy. I
Yeah,
wonder if they
yeah.
were if they were told it would just be, there would be no audio, just go ahead, and they kind of were improvising, but really weird. But I just love that whole sequence because I really fucking feel we're in 1958 during that
Yeah,
sequence.
it's really well done, and it would have been very easy for those button-up shirts and shorts and belts to take you out in their ridiculousness. But you believed that these were 50s counselors when a little more attention was paid to the dress code, and
Yeah. And
yeah,
even their persona that they're all exuding is very much
they've got
of
some
the
soda
time.
shop.
They do some soda
Yeah.
shop with the extra PE. Also, we see the Camp Crystal Lake sign and it's like brand spanking new. It's so
Mhm.
pretty. It's only a few years old. So you buy it, but it's kind of crazy to think of the actors in that scene going to catch a Led Zeppelin concert with Kevin Bacon and the boys
Mm.
from the latter part of the film, but they probably hung out together. It's kind of wild. So let's finish up, please God. Let's finish up with, where do you put this film among the Friday the 13th franchise of the films that you've seen? Do you have times when you'll watch in order an entire franchise?
That's just not me. I
Yeah.
don't do a lot of rewatching. You and I doing this show has become the most rewatching I've no, it's really true, the most
Yeah.
rewatching I've ever done, and I certainly don't rewatch horror. I
Mm,
remember seeing several of the Friday the 13th. I remember seeing Happy Birthday to Me, a few others that we'll talk about in the future,
yeah.
but because it's the first one, if someone said, "We're all gonna watch Friday the 13th for the Halloween party, which one should we watch?" I would say the first one. I would either say first or 10th.
Mm.
I'm just fascinated by the idea that a slasher guy made it to space. That makes me very happy.
I mean, if you think about it, there's no difference between him being in space and him being underwater.
Well, actually, that makes me think about the fact that the way you're talking about Jaws when we talk about this,
Hmm.
there's a weird
Oh yeah.
yeah, like Jaws is a Jason. He is a Michael Myers. He kills teenagers who are horny. He starts off that way anyway.
Right.
I hadn't really drawn any of that connection, but now I see that entire running on the dunes where
Yeah.
he chases her, and now I see that entire thing
Hmm.
as a slasher style opening. It's very interesting. I think of Jaws as being on a whole nother level,
Right.
but yet there
And
it
it is.
is.
It's a classic. It's one of the greatest
Obviously,
films
yeah,
ever made.
yeah,
It's a
yeah.
perfect film.
Yeah. In this case, I 100% agree with you. But I feel it is close. At least that first part is
Hmm.
closely related to these slasher movies.
I think when it comes to a franchise like Friday the 13th, where each film varies wildly from the other films in the series, the great thing about them is that every person has their favorite film, and it's usually totally different. The only Friday the 13th film I ever saw in the theater was Jason Takes Manhattan.
Oh, I remember that. I remember that coming out. I don't
Yeah,
remember
I
seeing it.
couldn't
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what number it is, but Dave's on it.
V3. That's 8.
Oh, that's 8, yeah. So, Friday the 13th, part 8, because I saw it in the theater. It was my only time watching any of these films where I reacted to deaths with an entire audience. I remember there were certain characters that we laughed at a lot. There were certain deaths that were wonderfully funny. I also love the fact that there seemed to be some sort of like ingenuity on the part of the producers. How do we get him to Manhattan? And he ends up like skitching a ride, accidental like, on a cruise ship because he
Okay,
kills
okay.
people on the ship. And then the ship
Oh, maybe
sails into the harbor. I just remember seeing Jason with the backdrop of the NYC skyline. It's beautiful.
congratulations on an excellent description because I'm starting to be like, I think I saw this one.
I
Yeah,
haven't seen it in years. I don't own that
I
film. I should
I
rewatch
remember
it.
I mean, you know the title of the movie, and yet it was impactful
Yeah.
when the camera went up Jason, and Jason has the
Oh,
skyline behind him.
it's great.
And you know those guys just like the space guys were like, "Oh, We did it.
Yeah.
It's literally rushing back right now. There's an element of Jason as this franchise goes on. He's starting to occasionally be the person who is badder than real life bad guys, like pimps and drug pushers. This is your first time meeting Jason. Bad news for you. You're not the toughest guy on 35th Street anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
They made Jason in some of these films into an Avenger of sorts.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's somebody who
Yeah.
like, oh, you think you know what dangerous is? No, here's
I think
dangerous.
I can picture the producers saying, "We have a problem," like calling each other and saying, "We have a problem." What? People are really starting to love Jason. And I mean, not love that he's their favorite person to hate.
Right.
People are starting to like him.
Right.
He needs to start doing some good. It may have begun, I remember people talking about the fact that in one of the camp-based ones, he only kills counselors. There's
Right.
one that takes place during actual camp time, and there are children. And while he will scare the children, he will not kill the children.
Yeah.
But that could, it could be a thing that affects a lot of these movies that we haven't even mentioned. You're not just doing what you're capable of, you're doing what you can get away with a certain rating.
That's true. That's true. In fact, Sean Cunningham said the MPAA gave him the rating he wanted because he did a couple of cuts and they pretty much got the print they wanted. But because they had so many copycat slasher films in their wake, people kept telling the MPAA, well, listen, you let Friday the 13th get away with this, and you let Friday the 13th get away with that he said it made it tougher when he did the sequels, that it felt harder to him.
No more setting precedent, Mr. Cunningham.
That's right.
Yeah, you opened too many doors the last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So a lot of people have him to thank.
Yeah. Cool. I feel like Shocktober is picking up speed.
And I believe this episode is airing
on the 13th, Friday the 13th.
Really?
Yep. That's why I suggested Shocktober.
People, this was in the business plan he presented to me 6 months ago.
If you're not going to read your prospectus, I'll find another backer. I was pleasantly surprised. I enjoyed this film.
Yeah, I've said it several times, not a horror genre guy. I had no problem sitting through this film, which is
that is such a great bar that you have.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'll tell you something else. Camp Crystal Lake seems like a lovely place to visit, even with the killing.
Killing aside.
Yeah.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? Let's leave it there. Hollis and Dave would like to thank you for enjoying Pop Culture Graveyard.